You are listening to Interesting Canadian Mormons, a podcast featuring conversations with interesting Latter-day Saints from across Canada. I am your host, Samson Nordquist. Today my conversation is with Richard Cumley, a professional artist who is most well known as the creator of Captain Canuck, our very own Canadian superhero. Discover with me what makes Richard Cumley an interesting Canadian Mormon. Today I have a very, very special guest. His name is Richard Cumley, and he is the creator of Captain Canuck. Richard, welcome.
Thank you. Happy to have you.
So, just to start us off, could you tell us a little bit about your upbringing, your childhood? Where were you born? Let's start there.
I was born in Oxford, England. My parents immigrated when I was born in 1950. My parents immigrated in 1953, so I was just a toddler. My parents actually lived in a village called Horton-cum-Studley, because when I talk to British people and I tell them I was born in Oxford, they say, "Oh, a very posh place," and then I explain to them, no, my parents lived in Horton-cum-Studley. You know, they didn't live in Oxford.
And that makes sense to them.
Yeah, well,
Okay.
I don't want them to think I'm hoity-toity, that's all.
All right.
And I don't know enough about, English class structure to, I just don't want any misunderstanding. As I said, my parents immigrated to Canada when I was a toddler, so I have no memory of England. We lived in Ontario for a year and a half, then moved to Manitoba. My memory begins leaving Ontario. My parents were actually headed for British Columbia. Mm-hmm. They basically ran out of money, or the thing is with most Europeans and Brits, they don't appreciate how big the country is. So after going, all that distance, and we're still only halfway there, they said, forget it, we'll stop here.
Was it a drive? They were
driving
out there. Oh,
yeah,
boy.
and this is before the Trans-Canada Highway.
Oh, wow. This all back roads then.
Yeah. They came through the States. You had to.
Oh.
You couldn't, it's the only way you could come from Ontario to, I guess maybe there was some back roads up in northern Ontario. I really don't know. But wow. That's the way my parents came, is they felt they had to go through the U.S. It wasn't their goal to go through the U.S. Anyhow, I am.
So you landed in Manitoba.
Yeah, we landed up in Manitoba. My parents basically, it is sort of where they landed. They said, this looks good enough. It was actually Portage la Prairie, Manitoba. And they said, this town looks about the right size. My father had gone to agricultural college in England, and their goal was to eventually own a farm of their own in Canada, which they did. They bought their first farm in 1956, and I still have memories of the first time we went to visit it. And this was in Gainsborough District, about 7 miles outside of Portage la Prairie, Manitoba.
All right. And you stayed there for 3 years?
I was there from the age of 6. Well, we arrived in Manitoba when I was about 5, and we moved to that farm when I was about 6, and I was there until I was 17. I finished high school at the age of 17, and just before I was 18, I moved to Winnipeg. My birthday's in October. So in the summer of, what would that be, 1968, mm-hmm. I moved to Winnipeg to work.
At the age of 17?
Yeah, well, I was almost 18. Yeah. So,
all right.
It didn't seem unusual to me at the time to do that. So
okay, so growing up, I've got a couple questions. Was there, now I know that you are a convert.
Yeah.
And so at this point, was there a faith in the family? Did you attend church?
My parents were Anglicans, which kind of makes sense. Mm-hmm. And I was christened. My mother said I was christened in a big Anglican abbey in England before we came here. But we didn't attend the Anglican church. I went as a kid with neighbors was mostly was just neighbors to the United Church. And then later on, I remember attending, and this was just, they would come around and invite kids to Sunday school camps. I remember Presbyterian going to their Sunday school camp. And then when I was around 11, I started attending Mennonite Brethren Church. And wasn't really my looking for, at church. It was, they just came to our home and said, would you like your children, we'll pick up your children and take them to church.
Yeah.
And my parents said, sure. And it just happened to be Mennonite Brethren Church. And we would go every Sunday. They'd pick us up. And I did that from probably around the age of, I'm going to say 11 to about 16, something like that.
That's really nice of them. We should do that, eh?
Yeah. Yeah.
So was God a big part of your upbringing? Was he?
Well, not in the, I didn't come from a religious home very, I only remember a few times us praying as a family, and one of those times was during a very traumatic time when my little brother had his first grand mal seizure. I had a younger brother who had meningitis at age of 3, and it caused brain damage, and he became an epileptic. And the very first grand mal seizure, I still remember standing at the end of the bed with my little sister, and we're just, we're shocked. Our little brother's thrashing around, and
that's a scary thing.
Yeah, and my mother, I still remember it to this day. She literally put her hand on both of our shoulders, pushed us down till we were on our knees. She got on her knees and said the Lord's Prayer. That's all she knew how to do. We had no, he was.
This is before it was diagnosed.
No,
or they knew.
This would have been. Let me see. He would have been about 4 or 5 by then, and the meningitis had caused brain damage, and he was told that my parents were told that he would have problems all his life, and that epilepsy was one of them. But as far as I know, that was the first grand mal seizure he had.
Oh, I see.
And so it was, and it's so horrific to see it for the first time in a small child. You know what I mean? And thrashing about and foaming at the mouth and the whole bit. And so my mother, even though my mother went through the Blitz of London, she didn't handle, crises, situations like that very well at all. So
was art a big part of your youth?
I think, like many children, I drew as a small child.
Yeah.
I was encouraged by adults who said, "Oh, you draw well for your age," and I was just encouraged by the right people, I think. You know what I mean? And I just continued to do it. I think what happens with a lot of children is that there's probably other children who draw quite well, and they just don't stay at it. You know what I mean? They're just not compelled to work hard enough at it to develop the skill level to do something with it. But for some reason, I did enough of it. You know what I mean? I think that's my theory, anyways.
That is kind of interesting. You saying that because you actually put on these today. You put on these art lessons for free for anybody
on Thursdays.
On Thursdays. At where's it? Where's it held?
Well, in the Welland Ward of Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Welland Ward, and we actually started doing this, as you may remember. We started doing this in Kitchener.
Yeah.
And we've had much more success with it here.
I saw a spot on the news. Featuring this. It's quite a
in Niagara region. The radio station, the newspaper, and Cogeco, which is its cable news, but our cable station, have all covered it. And we have a lot of non-members coming, and they come on a regular basis, and they seem to be enjoying it. And it's an effort for us to get to know some of the non-members who live in the area, and hopefully it's a missionary tool.
Yeah.
We thought if we can have non-members come in for an art class that and we could get to know them, and they could get to see what our chapel is like. We're going to give them a tour of the chapel, and and hopefully that'll break some barriers too.
Okay, so take us to. You're working now. You mentioned you're going to Winnipeg for employment. What were you?
Well, when I was in high school, starting around the age of 13 or 14, my parents gave me a lettering brush, a proper sign lettering brush, and I taught myself how to do hand lettering. And so in Portage, I was able to, do that for stores. And these were Safeway and Sandstore. Sandstore chain was big back then. And the local, I was able to go in and make signs for them. So for my age, I was able to make a fair, a little more money than average by doing that kind of stuff. And and then when I went to Winnipeg, the first job I got was at a sign shop. I only worked there for 4 months, and then I got a job as a crest designer, which is back then everything had to be hand drawn. You're talking mostly sports crests and any cresting that that was to be put onto garments, sewn onto garments. It was all, most of them were done by machine individually. I also did them for these automatic machines that would make.
Do you sort of have to program them to stitch the way?
Now you got to remember that back in the late 60s, early 70s, it was still fairly new. They've certainly progressed a lot more since then. And I ran into somebody who owned a cresting company, and I told him, I did that many years ago, and chatting with him, I could see things are much, much different today. It's all computerized. There's nobody sitting at a desk like I was, drawing after drawing. It's literally just do one drawing and, it was, you know what I mean? It was, you would sit there and draw these crests out. Everything had to be drawn, and then a pattern was made from the drawing to make the crest.
Okay. So right from your very first job, art was a big part of it. I was going to ask if you had any formal training in art. Did you go to school?
No. I worked, as I said, as a crest designer. I did that, and then I got opportunities to do fashion styling, and we're talking in the late 60s, early 70s. In 1970, I applied for and I got a bursary to attend Red River College, and they had a new course called advertising art. It was relatively new, and it was a 2-year course, and I was able to take that course in 1970. It was I only took the first term of it, though. It was 4 terms. I took the first term. I actually found it of value, especially life drawing and photography were both courses that I think I benefited from. I hardly remember any of the other courses that were part of the overall, course. But I know there was graphic design there too. And remember, this is graphic design before computers. No computers involved whatsoever, you know what I mean, at that point. And but I only took 1 term of it. The main reason being is in between the 2 terms, I got some opportunities to do fashion styling, and I actually thought I would make that a career.
Fashion styling, like as in?
I was doing a lot of women's outerwear. I was doing. You got to remember, late 60s.
Is this like
I was designing clothing.
Clothing, okay. Yeah. So you're dealing with. This is drawing, or this is?
Yeah. Oh, no. I had to do a lot of drawing, and I had to learn to make patterns too.
Oh wow!
Because I would do the drawings. Usually, and a lot of times it was sold from the drawings.
So you would draw up sort of dream up the concept first. People would say, "Yeah, I like that, and let's make a pattern from that." Is that sort of how it worked?
Yeah. Okay. If you're old enough, if anybody listening who's old enough, one of the things I designed, and this was for JD Products because they were really big into embroidery. Bell bottoms were very, very popular in the late 60s, early 70s, probably up until the later 70s. I can't remember when they kind of faded out, but there was two particular design. Embroidery down this side of the pant was hot, so I did 4 different designs, and they made thousands and thousands and thousands of pairs of these. And the other one that I did which they made many, was two-tone. So it would be bell bottoms that would have a different color here down, and some of those would have embroidery too.
Okay.
So these were, and I would drive down, be going down the street, and I would see people wearing them. And I particularly was not crazy about the look. I wouldn't wear them myself, but hey, I did wear.
You got to go with the flow.
I'm sure I wore bell bottoms back then. I just don't remember it very clearly. But yeah.
So did I guess I'll ask you a little later when we get to that part of the interview. But I didn't realize that you were so informed with fashion. I guess did that play out when you with your characters? Would it be just like, oh, this is just like fashion designing, or was it when you come up with costumes?
I don't know if I was so informed. I mean, I was informed in the moment kind of thing, because you got to remember what fashions were being dictated by the hippie movement. Yeah. That's where the bell bottoms come from, and things like vests and all kinds of stuff like that. I designed for 2 boutiques, for example, and they were very much in that, vests and gauntlets. That's one of the things I designed. Gauntlets, people, that people would wear, you know what I mean? It was all kinds of hippie kind of inspired fashions back then.
Yeah. So. Yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
What's next?
I did work for a little while as a graphic artist for a printer.
Okay. And
again, this was before computers. Obviously, we're talking in the early 70s. I had I joined a church in 1971. I was still 20 when I joined the church. Mm-hmm. I was already married at that point, and I had 1 child, and about maybe 8 months after I was baptized, we had another child. And my wife at the time did not join the church. I don't think she was so much against the church. Her parents were adamantly against my joining the church. So were mine. I did,
Your parents were Anglican.
Her parents were Catholics, and suddenly they became very devout Catholics, and or it seemed very sudden to me that they became very devout. But they, so I went through, and all my friends were not happy about me becoming a Latter-day Saint either. So, life changed for me fairly dramatically. The other situation with my first wife is, I didn't know this when we first got married, but she had some emotional, mental problems that really kind of surfaced maybe a year and a half after we were married, and she was eventually diagnosed as bipolar. Mm-hmm. And really I was pretty ignorant of, I really didn't, any little quirks I noticed were just, I thought it was more personality than a problem. So about, about a year after I became a member of the church, she left. And, it was a rough, maybe 6 or so months before then. What I did actually in, early 72, we moved to Calgary, Alberta. I was hoping that a new, kind of new surroundings, new environment might be helpful. Yeah. So we moved to Calgary. I worked a few different jobs there as commercial artist for a couple of different companies, but then came back after we separated. Eventually, I came back. I got custody of our two sons, and I just came back to Winnipeg and basically picked up doing similar kind of work I was doing back there, except I started to do more graphic design work in the early 70s. I still did some fashion styling for companies. I went back to work for a company. I was JD Products, but eventually I started doing more and more, freelance work, and I just did everything I could to make a living, and that involved a little bit of fashion styling where I could sell it. It involved, working for JD Products for stints and doing crest design. I worked for a while for a printer doing graphic design.
In graphic design, is it?
I was doing it.
What kind of a?
What
would you see?
Well, in graphic design, what I was doing, I would do drawings that would be used, for an ad or whatever, and any type that was involved. The process we used back then was it would be typed out, and then the printer would print that off, and then I would cut it up and paste it up. So it was kind of their own system, but and of course I did a lot more of that. And back in those days, you got all your typography, all your copy, you sent it out to a company that did it, and they would type it all up, and it would be printed out on photographic paper, and it would be waxed underneath so that you could adhere it to your paper, your board. And so that's one of the things I eventually had to learn how to do, was to
that's the old-fashioned way.
Yeah, it's long ago gone. You know what I mean? Now anybody can do it on their own computer, obviously. You know what I mean? Yeah. But back then you had to send out to a company and order. You had to tell them the font, the size, the leading, all of that stuff, and they would type it up, send it back, and then you paste it onto your ad.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, it was a different time.
Yeah.
Were there? I mean, was it easier to make mistakes in those days, or sometimes? Just because of limitations, there's certain things you just couldn't do, or was it pretty much you could do, if you were good, you could do just about anything?
Well, I was still learning that part of it. I did, working for the printer in Winnipeg as a graphic designer. When we moved to Calgary, I got work at a design studio, and this was, kind of a more prestigious design studios. Back then, if you wanted an ad, people would use these. They were kind of like a what would you call them? They're like an advertising agency. And they would provide, you would go in and say, I need an ad for this, to promote this or that. And then they, give it to the artists and the designers and the writers, and you'd get your ad, you'd produce your ad. Mm-hmm. So I did work for a company doing that for a short while. I got the job based on my portfolio. But what I soon found was I did not know much about typography, and ordering the typography and the fonts and the leading. I was still pretty vague on that kind of stuff. I didn't know how to do it very well, and I needed to do a lot of that. And I only lasted there 2 weeks because I did not have that skill down, and that skill was more important than at least as important as being able to draw.
Oh wow, yeah.
It was a humbling experience.
I wanted to go back a little bit, if that's okay. Specifically, I wanted you to talk a little bit about your conversion story. Where did you run into members of the church or the missionaries, and what made you decide to join the church?
Missionaries came to my door, and that would have been in the early part of 1971. I'm going to guess they probably came about March. I'm thinking they came sometime in March of 1971 to my door. And basically distracting, knocked at my door, and
this is in Winnipeg?
This is in Winnipeg. The missionaries came to my door, and then I knew nothing about the church. I can remember them telling me a few little things, like maybe, that the church's headquarters was in Utah. I'm not sure I knew where Utah was, to be honest with you. You know what I mean? But they asked if they could come back and tell me more about the church. And I said yes. And so they came back a week later. I think it was exactly a week later.
Mm-hmm.
And they started to teach me the first discussion. In those days, I believe they taught, we're talking 1971, so there might have been 7 or 8 discussions. I don't know for sure. But they used flannel boards, and they, in those days, I remember that very clearly.
Was it in the days where you had to, I mean, if you wanted to be baptized, they would say, well, you've got to wait like a year before you're allowed to be baptized? You could be baptized pretty much right away? Or
I was baptized in May.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
this would have been after, I guess. Yeah. It used to be where you had to.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I know there was a period when they wanted you to. They really. No, I was baptized about, I'm going to guess, maybe 7 weeks after the missionaries came to my door.
Were you at this point in your life? Were you still attending church? Or were you still?
Nope.
This was.
No, I was not attending church. I was not attending the Mennonite Brethren Church. I was living in Winnipeg now. I don't know. I don't even know where they would have met in Winnipeg. Now and then I did meet with old friends from the Mennonite Brethren Church in Portage la Prairie, where I attended. In fact, Jake Dick and his wife Liz Dick I felt close to them. They were kind of like youth minister. He was kind of like a youth minister. I don't know if he was, specifically designated as a youth minister, or if he just kind of served like that, and maybe they didn't have that calling or designation. But anyways, I knew them well. My first wife was a Catholic, and I had attended Mass with her a few times. Mm-hmm. She was not, a regular church attender. It was just on occasion. And but the interesting thing was, about that time, around that time, I started to listen to Billy Graham and Ted Garner Armstrong. These are 2 popular radio evangelists, and I used to, when the Jehovah's Witnesses came around, I would read the material that they would leave me. Mm-hmm. I even talked to my boss at work, who was Jewish, about his faith, and it was more subconscious than anything, but I was searching, and I could remember, just kind of going past churches and looking at them and wondering, is this the right one? Should I really be looking into this one? Or what I mean? And like I said, it was more subconscious. But
there's always like kind of like the spirit maybe tugging on you, saying, hey, you gotta, it's not like you were never like, I would say you're probably not an atheist.
No, I wasn't.
At this point.
No, I wasn't an atheist. I was just lost and confused.
Yeah.
And like I said, I would listen to, for example, Billy Graham. I remember listening to him, and I can remember thinking, gee, there was something there, but there's a lot missing there too. I mean, I felt like, okay, like you've left out something, yeah. But I don't know what it is. Anyways, but when the missionaries came along, and that I very vividly remember the first time they taught me. They're teaching me. And then I asked questions. Then they answered me. Then I asked more questions, and I ended up keeping there a lot longer than they had planned that night. And they told me later, I think it was after I was baptized, they said, that first night we actually ended up teaching you the three discussions. That they would normally.
Oh, they love those kind of investigators. Yeah.
But what really got to me is I started asking questions, and they taught me the plan of salvation. And when they taught me the plan of salvation, the fact that we lived with our heavenly parents before mortality, and that we were here for a purpose. That's when when they taught me the plan of salvation, I said, in my mind, I said, this is it. You know what I mean? This is what I've been, this is the information I've been missing here.
Yeah.
And the other sensation I had during that was, and I know many other people have had exactly the same feeling. I felt like I've heard of this before, but it wasn't immortality, you know what I mean? Because it was my first time hearing about it, immortality. But, that was the sensation. And I know I've talked to other converts and they've felt the same thing. Like you this was something you knew about once or heard it before, but you can't remember when. You know what I mean?
It's a familiar
feeling. There's something familiar, very familiar about this information. But then when you realize later on, well, I didn't hear it during mortality. You know what I mean?
All right.
So and then the missionaries continue to come back every week and teach me, and progress to the point where they didn't ask me about being baptized until a week before I was baptized.
Wow.
Yeah, they said after they may have mentioned baptism, but I don't remember them mentioning baptism, and I certainly don't remember them setting a date. It was.
Was it a big jump for you? Was it like one of those the most important decision that you have to make in your whole life, and it required a lot of thought, a lot of prayer, or was it sort of like no, this totally makes sense? Yeah, I'm going to do it. Like what kind of a?
Well, this I remember quite well too. Now I smoked, I drank. I mean, I didn't drink much, but I drank, and of course I drank coffee and tea, and so. I can remember, first of all, I can remember praying and fasting, and I can't remember what order I did things in anymore, but I think I know that I quit smoking about 5 days before I was baptized. Smoking and coffee and drinking wasn't so much a matter of quitting it was just deciding not to do it again. You know what I mean? And
but the other things you were hooked on?
Yeah, I was smoking. I was a regular smoker. I wasn't a heavy smoker, but I smoked every day.
Oh boy, was that tough? Or was that?
No, I mean it wasn't too bad. The coffee was just as tough. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. People like their coffee.
Yeah, because I didn't drink a lot of coffee, but no, I can remember feeling the results, the caffeine withdrawal, just as much as the nicotine withdrawal, but it wasn't bad. I mean, I was 20 years old, and when you're that young, you're a little more resilient, hopefully, and so it wasn't a big trial to give up those things at all, really.
Yeah.
But I do remember the missionary baptized me. He basically said, you've been taught and you've felt the Spirit. I don't know if he didn't say it in those words, because they weren't as specific about certain things maybe they are today. But and he said, I want you to fast about it. And I never fasted before in my life. So for the first time in my life, I fasted and I prayed about the decision to be baptized. So I might have done that first and then quit smoking. I think that's the order I did it in. You know what I mean? Did the fasting. I can remember the fasting, which was no big deal, going without food so much. But I do remember, the purposeful effort of fasting and then going and kneeling by my bed and specifically asking, is this true? You know what I mean? Was Joseph Smith a prophet? Is the Book of Mormon true? I'd only read about 30 pages of it by that point. And I had decided when the missionary started teaching me I needed to read the New Testament through first, so I devoted my time to doing that during that period. But and I just remember having a very a peaceful, very confident feeling that it was true. It was nothing really profound other than just a very reassuring, peaceful, confident feeling that yes, this is all true. And that was enough for me to, make those changes. So
Yeah.
one of the things I did for a living before Captain Canuck was in 1973. Around that period, I was still doing some fashion styling, I even did the odd sign job every now and then. I was just doing anything to make a living because I was self-employed at that point. But one of the things I did a fair bit of was portraits and caricatures. And in 1973, I had a deal with Eaton's department store, if people remember Eaton's department store. And on the 8th floor of Eaton's department store in downtown Winnipeg, which was, the biggest retailer in all of the province, really. So I did portraits and caricatures during November and December of 1973, and that's where I met Evelyn.
Oh,
so,
wow.
Yeah. So
Super.
Yeah, I am.
How did you meet her? Was she?
She worked on that floor.
She worked at
Eaton's.
At Eaton's.
She worked at Eaton's. I had to pass by her desk every day to hang up my coat.
Mm-hmm.
And then one day she came over and chatted with me, and she wanted me to do a picture of one of her friends from a photo. And she would come over and chat with me during a lunch break or whatever. And then I gave her a copy of the Book of Mormon, and then I invited her to a church fireside, and then I introduced her to the missionaries. So that was we don't know, it probably would have been in later November,
Which year?
1973.
1973. Okay.
And so she was taught by the missionaries, and I baptized her in 1974, March 2nd of 1974. I baptized her. We weren't going out at that point. I mean, we were seeing each other fairly often, and it wasn't until July of 1974 that I proposed marriage to her. July 11th, to be precise, that I drove over to her place with my 2 kids and asked her to marry me. And we wanted to be married in the temple, so we had to wait another 7 months so what I ended up doing in the last, how many months? What I did is I moved in with her brother after we decided to get married. Probably it was about October. I moved in with her brother, and I rented a house that was walking distance to the church, and she moved into that house with my 2 boys, and I would see them quite often. You know what I mean? I was working a lot, but obviously I'd see her, but I stayed with her brother. The last month before we were married, I had to sleep on my office floor because my brother-in-law moved out of his apartment.
Oh boy.
So anyways, so then we drove to Cardston, and we were married in March 4th, a year and 2 days after she was baptized.
Oh wow. And where did you live?
When we came back, we lived in that house that I rented. Actually, what happened was my brother-in-law moved out of that apartment and moved into the basement of the house that that we were renting for Evelyn and the kids.
Oh, okay.
And another sister moved in too. You know what I mean? So that house, it wasn't a real big house, but it could accommodate, all 5 people there. And then after we got married, that sister moved out, and Henry moved out shortly after we got married. So,
yeah. How many kids do you have?
I have 8 children.
8 children?
Yeah. When, as I mentioned, I was married when I joined the church. I had 2 children. I was divorced. The children, my 2 oldest sons, stayed with me. And actually, their mother, who had mental illness and alcohol problems, didn't visit them, which turned out it to be better, really, under the circumstances.
Yeah.
But a couple of years later, I met Evelyn. We got married. She adopted my 2 boys, which is the process we had to go through.
Yeah.
And then we had 6 more. So we have 8 children.
Wow.
Only 1 is a girl. And at this
7 boys.
7 boys, 1 girl. Yeah.
That's like the 7 dwarves.
Yeah.
Snow White and the 7 dwarves.
Yeah. I never thought of that before. Oh my goodness. I'm going to have to mention that to my daughter. Yeah.
Wow, that's quite amazing. I know one of your sons. Are any of them still living here at home, or
No.
they're all grown?
Oh no, they're all
grown up.
They're all old.
Gone.
Our youngest one is 28.
Oh, okay, yeah, long gone.
Yeah. Well, let me see. He was born in 76. Is he 29? Let me see.
No,
Anyway.
no, that'd be 37 if he was 76.
No. 80.
86. 86?
Yeah, 86. Is it? Oh my. Anyways, yeah. Anyway, he's in late 20s. Let me put it that way.
Come on, 8 kids. I don't blame you.
Yeah.
Not remembering, so that's quite remarkable.
No. We've been empty nesters now for about 4 or 5 years.
Yeah?
Something like that. Anyways, I just thought, I think I should mention the fact that we have 8 children.
Yeah.
And
that's
8 grandchildren.
Certainly notable. So your grandchildren, wow, 8, I didn't know you had 8 grandchildren.
We just had one of our sons and his wife had twins recently.
Wow.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right. You're about the same age as my dad. Well, he was born in 1950, but I got to say, you don't look 63. You probably look about 15 or so years younger than that. And what's your secret? I mean, you gave up the smoking and stuff, but really, what do you do to stay so young? You actually, you and your wife, you look very young. And so what is it?
When I was a very, very new member of the church, back then we didn't have the 3-hour block yet. That didn't come until 1980s, right? Mm-hmm. I remember going to church and we went to Sunday school. We went to Sunday school and then we went to there were all 3 separate meetings that you went back and forth for. Priesthood, then you came for Sunday school, then you came for sacrament meeting. You were in church a lot more than you are nowadays.
I've heard stories, yes. I'm probably too young to remember that. But
anyways, I remember during the Sunday school portion of our Sabbath meeting, a brother spoke about the benefits of eating whole grain versus processed. Mm-hmm. And I listened, I said, that makes perfect sense. I mean, and from then on, I said, well, I'm not going to eat, white bread again. That makes so much sense. You know what I mean? To eat whole grain of everything. Mm-hmm. And after that, I started to get a lot more conscientious about nutrition and diet. And I would go to health food stores and look around and buy stuff. And eventually I started reading books on it too. So, and then about 10 years ago, my wife and I became vegans, which I think helped a lot too.
Oh yeah? Excellent.
So
that's hard for some people to get their heads around. Like, how do you not? Wait. Okay. First of all, what's a vegetarian and what's a vegan? What's the difference?
Well, vegan, no animal products, like no dairy products or eggs either.
Okay, so a vegetarian could eat...
they might eat cheese or eggs or that kind of stuff.
Right, it's not meat, but it still comes from an animal. Where vegan is completely plant.
Yeah. Now, we will still eat butter once in a while, and we'll use honey once in a while. So we're not the strictest of vegans, because a really, really strict vegan, we're not doing it based on principle. We're doing it solely because we believe it's a healthier way to live, that's all.
Well, the proof is in the pudding.
Yeah. So
kind of a bad example, but
yeah. No,
Yeah, you guys look great, and you've remained young, really, and so that's quite an example.
Well, we're convinced it's a healthier way to live. The other thing too that we find about being a vegan, it's very convenient. Putting meals together. We eat a lot of salads, for example, and it doesn't take long to prepare most of our meals.
Don't have to cook it.
Yeah. You know what I mean?
Fry it up or clean
that's
up
right.
after.
Yeah,
that's not bad.
Yeah, for about 3 or 4 years, we ate strictly a raw vegan diet, which is a little harder.
What's a raw vegan diet?
Nothing is cooked. It's just fruits, vegetables, and seeds and nuts, but nothing has been cooked.
Right.
So it's just a little more difficult, especially when you're going out somewhere. You know what I mean? And even if you know, even with vegan diets, I mean, it's tough enough, but then to have nothing cooked of what you're going to eat.
Yeah, who serves that kind of,
No, well, there are restaurants there are raw vegan restaurants. There's not very many of them.
Yeah.
What happened, how I got into that, I mean, like I said, we were always health conscious, or, you know, always conscientious about diet to a certain degree, not trying not to eat too much junk food, trying to avoid too much processed food, and eat fruit and vegetables a little more. I started to do video production in about the late 90s, and then 10 years ago I was asked to go down to a place in Maryland, a wellness center in Maryland, and videotape there for 2.5 weeks. And this place is where people went to do therapeutic water fasting. In other words, they went there and they fasted. All they did was drink water, sip water throughout the day. And the whole purpose, the whole intent was just to allow the body to heal itself by, you know, taking the burden of digestion and assimilation of food out of the process. And I was impressed with how people seem to benefit dramatically from that. So then, and the fellow who ran it, Lauren Lockman, had been a raw foodist, and that's the term they often use, a raw foodist. He ate a raw vegan diet. He taught that. And so from the day I arrived, I wanted to try it. And after a couple of weeks, I was sold on it. I felt so much better. And so came back and we just continued. Fortunately, Evie was willing to do that with me. And
I'm curious to know, for you, is living healthy the same thing? Like, is this, to you, this is observing the word of wisdom to you?
Yeah, when I was a new member of the church, I can remember about a month after I was baptized, I was coming home from work. It was dark. And it suddenly hit me. I thought to myself, wow, I feel so much better. You know, not smoking, drinking, coffee, tea, all of those things out of my life. I felt so free. I felt healthier. I felt better in every way as a result of that simple one principle that I was living. And I just remember being grateful that I had accepted that principle, and I was was living it. And I just think like I said, I heard that talk about, and up to that point I hadn't really thought anything about what you eat until that talk. And then I thought, oh, it does make a difference what you eat, how your health is going to be impacted. And
sure does, yeah.
And so I just started to be more conscientious about it. I just started to realize, hey, can't eat junk food all the time, or can't eat meat and processed foods all the time and expect to be healthy. And in fact, my Evelyn, who I married, a few years after I was divorced, her and I went to a lecture on nutrition. That was probably one of the few things that her and I went to together to see. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
oh, that's fantastic. What's your calling right now?
I am the ward executive secretary.
Excellent.
It's my first time in this calling.
First time, yeah?
Yeah.
What are some of the notable past callings that you've held?
I've probably done everything except I've never been in a bishopric. I've been a Sunday school teacher. I've taught seminary. I've been in the elders quorum presence, I've been a ward mission leader 6 times.
Oh boy.
Yeah, I've been.
You've been around.
Yeah, I was when they used to have stake mission presidencies. I was in a stake mission presidency in one capacity or the other 4 times, I believe. Let me see what else. High priest, in the high priest group leader, a few times, 2 or 3. I was on the High Council once in Kitchener. What else? I worked in primary a little bit.
Yeah.
I've had some. I've always enjoyed working in primary.
Young men's?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
In those early in the church, I was called the Aaronic Priesthood Director, which I think is the same thing as Young Men's President today.